How's everyone doing today? I'm out in the woods, obviously, and today, being May 4th, is Dick Proenneke's birthday. For those who don't know, it's Richard Louis Proenneke. He was born in Iowa, May 4th, 1916, and he died April 20th, 2003 at the age of 86 years old. Dick Proenneke, to me and to many other people, is a very influential person. And for those of you who don't know him, I suggest that you go and look the man up. He was born in Iowa, I believe, and after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, he joined the United States Navy, and he was a carpenter in the Navy. He got very sick at that point in his life. I believe it was rheumatic fever, and he was laid up for some months. And it was at that point that he decided to, once he got better, to completely dedicate his life to his health and to being physically active. After his service in the military, he had traveled around. He actually drove cattle in the mountains of Oregon. He had worked as a ranch hand. He was I believe, a guide for salmon fishing, and he had worked on Kodiak Island. He was a diesel mechanic, a heavy equipment operator, very sought after, highly intelligent individual. Well, it was around this time in his life that being exposed to Alaska, that he loved the area and he wanted to live there, permanently build a cabin. And so in the summer of 1967 and 1968, he decided to build his own cabin on Upper Twin Lakes. And he did this all by hand, all hand tools. He packed out, there was 3 pack loads. He had to hike 5 miles one direction over the Alaska range to his area where his friend had a cabin. And he stayed at his friend's cabin while he was building his cabin. He packed in all his tools, but without the handles. He had a double bit cruiser axe, and he left the handle on that. But his chisels and gouges, things like that, he fabricated. He made the handles out there on site. This man is inspirational because of his work ethic and his love for nature, his closeness to nature, and his understanding of the need to have other people in your life, but to not be so connected that you lose all self. And he states that he never wanted to, be out of contact permanently. That he did believe that people should have, connections with people. And so he had built this cabin, and the rough dimensions, I think, might have been around like 12 by 18. He did all this with, hand saws, his axe, draw knife, hatchet. Amazing work. Alone in the Wilderness was filmed by him. He used the camera to film himself doing this. This is back in the late 60s. So, this guy is almost like the first, survivor man in a sense. He would set up a camera and he would go and he would do this work. It has aired on PBS in the past. I don't have television, and I haven't for many years, so I don't know if it's on there. That is not how I was exposed to it. I was exposed to him through a friend. He built this cabin. He used pea gravel from the nearby lake for his floor. He made his own hinges. Everything you can think of, this man did. And he documented wildlife heavily. And he documented weather patterns, precipitation, all sorts of things. And many of his things were used by the Department of, Conservation. The state of Alaska had used a lot of his information. And he was allowed to live his life out there. And there were some cabins nearby where rangers had resided. So some people did see him. And every several months or so, his friend, Babe Allsworth, would come in with a float plane, land on the lake, and give him certain supplies that he needed. So while he was, on his own, basically, I mean, if he came out with appendicitis, or, he probably would die before he'd be able to contact anyone. This is before, obviously the age of cell phones and the age of all this stuff. So, I mean, if you're not talking to someone face-to-face, there's no, calling them up out there and telling them where you are. There's no sending a signal. There's no GPS. There's nothing like that. So he did extensive hiking in the area as well, and he had commented in his journals that he had often wondered that if he had fallen and broken a leg or something on one of these mountains, what he would do. And he figured he'd probably would die on the mountain like one of the sheep that he had seen. He also said that don't worry about what isn't. And many times I have to repeat that to myself in life, because we have a tendency to think about things and start to fixate or worry about them. And that sticks with me a lot. There's so many amazing things about this man that I just, off the top of my head, I know so much about him. I've read, he's got some of his journals have been published. It's One Man's Wilderness, and there's another one called, I think it's Another Reading, but they're very thick books. They're great reads. It talks about just his day. He talks about his daily life. I mean, feeding birds by hand, watching weasels, bear, you name it. And he had some close calls with some bear. And after that, he said his rifle came along with him. And I'm going to do more about Dick Proenneke, and I'll get a lot of these stories squared away and a lot of these facts squared away for you as well. I'm not obviously bringing any new information about this man into light, because you can read about him all you want. But through my research on him, there are a lot of misconstrued information about on the internet and different things in regards to him. Very, very tough man, and very strong man. And in his prime, he was about 5'7", 150 pounds. And when you see this man lift these logs up and notch these logs and saw wood and do all this, he is a powerhouse. This is a generation, my grandparents' generation, basically, World War II generation. These people were tough people. They stopped the world from destruction, and they rebuilt it out of the ashes. This generation. I hear people say that World War II generation is one of the greatest generations. I have to agree with them. I am so privileged to have met people in this generation, this World War II generation, and Dick Proenneke being one of them just adds to the awesomeness to me. As I said, this gentleman built everything he needed, from a food cache that was about 9 feet off the ground, to his own cabin, to an outhouse and a woodshed, all by hand, all notched spruce. He peeled all these logs with draw knife. He had a Dutch door on his cabin, even thin plastic windows. They were quite wide. I forgot the actual dimensions of his windows. But the state of Alaska has preserved his cabin on Twin Lakes for visitation and whatnot. His rifle was a .30-06. His pistol was a .357 Magnum. And there wasn't all these tools and that some people may think of, guns and all this weaponry and all these things. This man lived very close to nature, and he took a very human approach to how he conducted himself out there. As the years went on, this guy had hiked the mountains. I had read accounts where people in their 30s had gone and seen him. And by this point, he was in his late 60s, and they said that he could out-hike them, and it was very hard to keep pace with him. He canoed up and down the lake, mostly fished, and he didn't hunt much. He said he didn't really believe in taking a lot of meat because it ended up being more than what he could use. But he did watch other hunters from a distance with his binoculars or a scope, and he would see them shoot a sheep or an elk or whatever, and he would go there the next day or later that day, and he would scavenge what these hunters had left, and that was how he would get most of his meat. Mostly sustained from fish. He did do a lot of blueberry picking, and his observations are just incredible. And I urge you to check out Dick Proenneke. And as I said, I will have more on this fine man later down the road. Thank you very much for watching. And once again, happy birthday to Richard Luis Proenneke. Take care.